Maybe Tom Terrific over here forgot to tell you that Sandrin's table rolls a little to the east.
I spent way too much time analyzing this pool table scene, and I can with all confidence tell you 3 facts. Tuvok is playing stripes, the ball on the table keeps changing between cuts, and they have both sunk 3 balls, so there's no way Tuvok didn't already know the ball wasn't moving the way he would have expected it to. So, I'm fairly confident that Tuvok threw the game just so he could get out of this. Also, I love this shot where Mo, Larry, and Curly turn in unison to give Tuvok a look. I like the friendship Tom and Neelix develop, and I can't stand the drama they force between them in a later episode Overcast.
Who are you?
Forgive me. I am Jetrel. Dr. Mabord Jetrel.
Ethan Phillips does an amazing job in this episode, and it starts right here. While I might quibble that he doesn't immediately recognize Jetrel, I'm more than willing to overlook it for the performance he gives in this moment. And what a powerful moment this would be in real life. To meet the man who butchered so many people in your species and your own family. Phillips' visceral reaction hits the nail on the head.
When I was much younger.
How old are you again, Neelix? Oh, that's right. It's never really addressed.
I have heard of your transporter technology, Captain, but to experience it firsthand is truly remarkable.
I love how after you watch the full episode, this comment is framed in a whole new light.
Neelix, why didn't you ever tell me about the war?
It's too hard to describe how I feel to someone who didn't see what I saw.
I think Neelix's response very accurately represents the frame of mind many soldiers have when returning home. It's not some sort of slight or insult that they aren't telling you about it, even if you're a spouse or a family member. Some things just can't be spoken about in a way that conveys the full breadth of the experience and the emotions that surround it.
If the disease is fatal, what's the point of knowing whether I have it or not?
I've had several family members who had this mindset, and it unfortunately led them to an early grave, and a lower quality of life than they would have had if they had caught the disease in the early stages. Do your loved ones a favor and get yourself checked out, will ya?
I simply want you to hear what he has to say. Then, if you still don't want him to examine you, no one will force you.
Cass might. I do love seeing how much the crew cares about each other, though. It always makes me feel more invested in the characters as well.
Or do you feel guilty?
Guilty. I do not regret it. I did what had to be done.
Alright, I've got to be honest. I don't know how much I'm going to be able to say about this episode. There are a lot of complicated issues going on in it, with some obvious inspiration taken from Hiroshima and the DS9 episode Duet, and I don't think I'm completely qualified to give a resounding opinion on it. But that's a hallmark of good sci-fi. It makes you stop and think. So the point here is go and watch this episode and expect a shorter video today.
Did you hear that, Captain? It was unfortunate.
Neelix, I think what Dr. Jetrel is trying
No, Captain.
I kind of appreciate Janeway trying to take a neutral stance in all this. She knows Neelix has raw pain he's working through, and that joining him in condemning Jetrel won't help Neelix's current situation.
It means I must live with my conscience. As you must live with yours. How many did you kill during the war?
This is one of the reasons I think Jetrel is not a completely sympathetic character. He tries to equate creating a weapon of mass destruction at the behest of the government with fighting in the army. There are rules of engagement for a reason. We recognize that even in war, there are lines that ought not be crossed.
I'm sorry, Mr. Neelix.
Sorry? Why are you sorry?
I'm afraid you have incipient natremia.
I've been keeping track, and this will end up being the 5th fake out on a character death we've had for the series so far. Once when Janeway didn't die in the temporal explosion, once when Ensign Kim didn't die in the suicide booth, once when Chakotay wasn't a space ghost, and then 2 half fake outs for B'Elanna's human half not being dead the last episode, and Paris not dying in the temporal explosion Janeway caused.
I must tell you, your ship is simply astounding. I have been studying your transporter system.
I love hints like this. If you had been paying very close attention, you would have noticed that this is the second time he's shown interest in the transporters.
I believe with the relatively few minor modifications, the transporter system could be used to retrieve a sample of the Metreon clouds surrounding Rhynex.
You know, when you stop to think about it, several times through the Star Trek franchise, they have introduced a concept that technically represents a universal cure. I think the transporter is probably the biggest one though. Lost your legs? Use a pattern stored in the buffer. Dying from a disease? Use your last pattern stored in the buffer. The transporter should be able to be used like a game save you can infinitely reload from.
And lay in a course for the Talaxian system.
That's a significant detour, Captain.
I'm aware of that, Commander. But it may mean saving Neelix's life.
Okay, so let me first praise the fact that Janeway was willing to make a detour on the off chance that they might be able to save Neelix. Unfortunately, the distances traveled for the rest of this episode makes just no sense whatsoever. Every official and officially unofficial reference that I can find places Talax and its moon of Rhinax as being even closer to the galaxy's edge than Ocampa was. But Voyager has been traveling for about 7 months towards Earth at this point, and they're way down here. That means that Voyager would have had to spend 7 or more months backtracking, but it obviously doesn't, so Talax would just so happen to have to be more or less on the route they are right now, which would make sense for that to be where Jetrel was, but other dialogue in the series doesn't support Talax being this far on their journey. Just nothing works out for the rest of this episode.
Very well then. Computer, override Command 1 EMH Alpha and end program.
I think this is the only time the Doctor has to give such a lengthy verbal command to shut himself down, but I like that we get to see one of the things he requested in terms of giving himself more autonomy has been granted to him.
Sir, if you'll not be needing me, I'll close down for a while.
If I'd been in charge of the Cascade, I'd have chosen a military target. Somehow I don't think I'd have targeted innocent civilians.
This is a part of the episode that was definitely meant to reference the bombing of Hiroshima. Sadly, history is forgotten and rewritten, or more people might know that Hiroshima was a military embarkation port and an industrial center. It wasn't just a random civilian target. And the US dropped leaflets providing the names of 11 or 12 cities that might be bombed, giving civilians a chance to flee. I'm not saying it was or was not morally correct to drop the bombs, but it is wildly different than how it's being presented today when people claim it was dropped on a non-military target or dropped specifically on innocent civilians.
You did this, butcher!
I have, from my earliest memories, had frequent, vivid dreams. Well, nightmares, but still, and never in my life have I had a dream so immediately and blatantly relevant to my current situation. Am I the odd one here? Do most people experience this, or is this just a nonsensical film trope? Okay, overly nitpicky science time, but I don't think it's possible to have an M-class planet with an M-class moon. Any M-class planet that wasn't obscenely dense wouldn't be able to capture and retain a dense enough moon that could keep an atmosphere capable of supporting life. And any M-class planet that was sufficiently dense would produce a species that could leap over a tall building in a single bound.
You don't know where I was the night Rhinax was destroyed. I wasn't fighting with the defense forces. I never reported for duty. I thought the war was unjust.
I hate this scene for a lot of reasons, but Ethan Phillips' acting is not one of them. He's doing a great job conveying hurt and uncomfortableness, confessing a sin he thought would never see the light of day. That said, I do hate this scene a lot. Neelix being a draft dodger makes no sense for what the entire rest of the series shows of us. Plus, this is an example of a writer trying to cram everything they can into a, shall we say, an anti-war episode as possible. Neelix says the war is unjust, but at the same time the Harkonians were actively invading and murdering his people. His own family was in immediate danger of dying, and there wasn't a motivating cause for him to stand up and fight? I can understand the person who objects to invading someone else's home. I can understand the defender being a coward and hiding. But to have the defender say that the war is pointless and morally wrong? What nonsense is this?
But was it really Jetrel you're angry with? Is he the one you blame for what happened?
Was the one who designed and deployed the bomb the one Neelix blames for what happened? I'm going to go with yes.
Computer, override Command 1 EMH Alpha and end program.
Now just wait, buddy.
Clearly, the Doctor is too polite to interrupt him during the 5 seconds it takes to make this verbal command. But more importantly, this really ignores the fact that the Doctor is supposed to now have control over turning himself on or off. You know how I know Jetrel is not as reformed as this episode wants us to believe? This scene is how I know. He has a working theory that the people still live in the gas, and he knows he doesn't have enough gas to completely reconstitute someone, and yet he continues on with the experiment anyway, with the full knowledge that his screaming head could briefly live in this tank. That's pretty messed up. Ethan Phillips cites this as one of his 5 favorite Neelix episodes. While I clearly have issues with the Dodgers aspect of the episode, moments like this definitely shed light onto why that is. It takes a real man to own up to his mistakes, and I'd love to see Neelix willing to confront his own actions head on like this.
Who, Doctor?
Close. I think I can fix this.
Doctor? Who?
Nailed it.
Who is it you're going to bring back?
The victims of Rhynex.
This was supposed to be the big twist or what if moment for this episode. What if someone who made the atom bomb met a survivor? It was a bit of a flat landing for me though, since it's not as black and white as the writer of this episode, and frankly a surprisingly large amount of people think it is.
Does Neelix really have Matremia?
It was just a pretext, Captain.
I love the genuine look of relief on Janeway's face at this moment as she realizes that Neelix isn't dying.
Why didn't you just tell us the truth in the first place?
Your captain is an accomplished scientist. She doubts my theories. I just could not risk being not believed.
I wonder how many times throughout Trek we have the "I didn't tell you the truth because I was worried you wouldn't believe me" plot device. I get the feeling it comes up often, but this one feels the most believable to me. Over the course of this scene, we see them give a single attempt to reclaim one of the Talaxians, which frankly almost works. They say the degree of fragmentation is simply too great, but before they started, they said his idea was junk research. This amount of success was phenomenal. It should have spurred huge efforts. It doesn't, because Janeway and Tuvok are right about it being impossible, of course, though.
I suppose you think this is a fitting punishment for me.
Maybe the cascade was a punishment for all of us, for our hatred, our brutality.
This is the problem with doing an anti-war episode where you're trying to make a reference to an actual event. It often waters down concepts to the point of absurdity. Should people stand by in the face of genocide? If you have 2 coats and your neighbor is dying from the cold, should you tell him to go, be warm, and be well fed, or should you give him a dang coat? Does this writer really not know that America twice requested the Japanese government to stand down or we'd use the bomb? That we asked Japan to come to peace in the war that they started when they launched an unprovoked strike on Pearl Harbor because Japan was marching to the beat of an imperial expansion? Look, dropping the atom bomb is a complex subject, and it gets me worked up that the writers clearly took no time to examine it. I think I've made my point clear here, so we're just jumping to the summary. I'm not even going to address the absurdity of Neelix forgiving Jetrel, or rather, the reason we're given for the forgiveness. So, Jetrel. This episode clearly didn't work for me at all, and it's not just because of the issues I've already pointed out. It's because the writers didn't know what tones or messages they wanted to convey. Jetrel makes a point several times to point out that he has no regrets for what he did, and then immediately talks about regret. He tries to compare his wife and child leaving him to being the same kind of suffering that Neelix is feeling for having his whole family brutally murdered. But really, he's just a kind soul through it all, right? It's like the writers didn't know how to make him complex, but wanted us not to like him, so they start the episode with Jetrel just being a jerk. And Neelix? I get him feeling guilty over his cowardice, but to say that he was really only mad at himself and not even the slightest bit angry at the one who built the bomb? Hogwash! Hogwash, I say! I think what the writers wanted for this episode was a recreation of the Season 1 DS9 episode Duet, but they failed to consider why Duet works and this doesn't. First, Kira was always a serious person, so we accepted her being serious in the episode. Neelix has not been a serious person, so it's hard to see him in this role. Also, we had a full season to get used to the idea of who the Bajorans and the Cardassians were, and there was no mixed messages about it. It was a clear comparison between the Jews and Germany, so we had a perfect mental picture of what Kira would have been feeling as she met with the leader of Auschwitz. But what made it really work is that in Duet, the Cardassian wasn't actually ever in a position of power. He was just a housekeeper to an evil man who felt genuine guilt to the point where he underwent surgery and assumed an identity so that he could be punished for crimes his people were guilty of, but he wasn't. It's why Kira's forgiveness of him works. It's why his death for just being another Cardassian is tragic. This episode tried to capture that kind of message, but failed to on all counts. Let me end this on a positive note, though. Ethan Phillips does a great job throughout this whole episode, and so did the actor who played Jetrel, who also, for the record, played the defecting Romulan admiral in the TNT episode The Defector, Odo's surrogate father throughout DS9, and an older Alexander Vroshenko in TNG. In terms of raw acting, And for being a bottle episode,
Didn't anybody here build ships in bottles when they were boys?
I did, sir.
they honestly did a good job. That's it for this video. If you want to be a week ahead of everyone else, you can join my supporters on either Subscribestar or Patreon by searching for Life with Matthew, or just clicking on the links in the description of this video. Thank you to my current supporters, which, according to my notes, are Professor Brainy Specs at the Priority 1 hailing level, John DeMarco and Thomas Potts at the Section 31 tier, and at the Hailing Frequencies Open tier are The Salty Trekker, Ben Joaz, Rock Solid Productions, Commodore Ty, Bird of Prey 5, and Dr. Alex. Be sure to subscribe for more, and until the next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.